Hello, everybody, and welcome along to a season in review. It is for season 16 of Tier 2. This one is, and I am Ryan Searles. This season was very interesting to look forward to. Before the season started, there was rumors of Reese Dainty dropping down to Tier 2. You had Night Owl moving over to Ferrari with Lennon, Torn Penguin moved over to Red Bull, and Blue Goggy got unbanned from RPL and returned to Tier 2 racing. He was in the Aston Martin. Our Mercedes lineup was interesting as well. We had George F. Williams alongside Mintoki before George decided to go back to McLaren in a swap with Polo God. We also had as well Lyro Fusion Tier 3 champion move up. Alex Norris moved up. But before he was ready for round 1, he saw that he was not allowed to race in Tier 2 any longer. Yes, that is correct. After his pole in Brazil, they moved him up from Tier 3 to Tier 1 entirely. Now, that was an interesting way to start the season for sure, but we started the season for the first ever time in Tier 2 around Portimao. Never had this happen before in RPL, whether it be F2, Tier 1, Tier 3, any tier. Tier 2 and Tier 3, both tiers, started out in Portimao for the first ever time. Tier 2 had qualifying here, and it started to rain very, very quickly, and if you were not the first one out on the track, well, you were kind of screwed. That meant Night Owl in the Ferrari, on his Ferrari debut, got pole position. And this race was very interesting with how it was set up. You know, it was supposed to rain later on as well. Do you go medium? Do you go hard later on? Well, lap 1 collision, you had George involved, Polo involved. Just calamity at the first corner, and it really set George back. And that was very surprising to see because he already ended off his campaign the previous season with not so great finishes in the penultimate round and the final round. However, our race got going later on. Contenders, JTK, Reese Dainty, Mintoki, Night Owl. Goggy was kind of in the mix. Torn Penguin was slightly back there. Lennon as well. But once the rain came, Reese Dainty, we thought he came in early. He did not. He ended up winning the race, and his return to Tier 2 ended up being a successful one. JTK finished second, and after all the 10-second penalties in the pit lane, we had at least 2 of them, Polo being one of them, Mintoki on the podium. Now, there were a lot of talk about JTK maybe getting moved up. Well, once we went to the next race in Japan, there was a lot more talk about that, because the next race, he also got a podium in Japan, JTK did. And for JTK's case, you know, although he was running no line in this tier, they figured if he ran line in Tier 1, he could do a lot of successful things considering what he was doing in the Alpine, and he eventually did get moved up to Tier 1. He was the next one to get moved up to Tier 1, and that was a big conversation this entire season in Tier 2. But the big conversation starting the weekend in Japan was the pole times. Mintoki and George, our first 2 starters, separated by 0.0000, the closest Tier 2 pole margin. And that happened around Japan. Qualifying in Japan was a bit crazy too, because Blue Goggy was involved in incidents, and eventually this got him with yet another ban. After coming off of a ban, you would think that things would change. It didn't. And Hyper was involved in incidents with him in the race. Reese Dainty, who had a poor start, was as well. But late in the race, it was a big train for the race win. Lennon got involved in an incident with George. George again didn't finish as well as he could have, but he finished 5th. However, in the end, Night Owl and Reese Dainty, after the Lennon-George collision, they were able to pull away from the pack, and those were the top 2 finishers. Now, after George got banned from the tier for being too quick, and obviously the next day in Tier 1, he backed it up with a good result in Baku and good pace there. So precedent sets precedent, as he would say, and he definitely proved that. It was F1 Shorts who started off the season in Alpine, getting moved up to the McLaren spot for his home race in Zandvoort. And at his home race in Zandvoort, Reese Dainty returned to the pole. This was the first time that he had been on pole since last game. And also for Tier 2, the first time in numerous seasons. But Reese Dainty had been flirting with that first pole in the first 2 rounds anyway, with P2, P3 in qualifying a lot. And a lot of good first laps he had when he really got going. But for Reese Dainty, it was a 10-second penalty and not the right strategy call. Same for Lyro Fusion, that sent both those drivers back and out of a chance for a victory. However, late on, when the rain came and changed things up with back and forth weather in Zandvoort, Mintoki trying to stay out on very, very late tires, she got taken out by F1 Shorts. That's what happened. And F1 Shorts didn't get a penalty for it, surprisingly. F1 Shorts, it was going to be a race between him and Night Owl for that victory. But because of this essentially ruined his chances. He had a 2-second gap before they started battling. When Mintoki was struggling, Night Owl went through and claimed the victory in Zandvoort. Was not a good race for Polo as well. Beatnik lost out on a photo finish, and this is what we were talking about a lot with him as well. Woda in the Alpine, we thought he would do a lot better this season. Just some of the drivers we're looking at right here who did not do well, but first time ever at a home race, we had 3 Dutch drivers in the points. That was quite neat to see, to say the least. But it seemed like at this point, it was a battle between Night Owl and Reese for the championship. They seemed unstoppable. Again, at this point, you're talking about maybe Reese Dainty being banned from the tier. You know, you don't like to have that conversation. But in Miami, that conversation kind of went down the drain. Reese Dainty chose the wrong strategy call again, and it really set him on the back foot here again, with the rain being a big factor in this race. You know, no second Ferrari, so it was a race between Night Owl, Reese, and Torn Penguin, who finally got on the front foot with that Red Bull finally. It took a long while, but he got there. Torn Penguin, after Night Owl's disconnect, took over the lead and didn't look back. It was Torn Penguin winning in Miami for the second time in his RPL career, and it was Night Owl in P2. Reese Dainty finished P3 from pole, ahead of F1 Shorts and AMS Bobby, who had a good day that day, and SV needed points for that Ferrari, finished down in P8. However, Mintoki finished down in P11. It was not her day, had a crash in the race, had a crash in qualifying, trying to get out of the way of another driver, and got disqualified by the game. Our next race in Silverstone, home race for RPL, it's safe to say, Night Owl got the victory. Now, he was battling Reese Dainty in the final lap, but Night Owl prevailed. However, second place finisher, we were surprised about him not going for it on that last lap. F1 Shorts, from pole position, finished P2 yet again. Mintoki was third, back on the podium. She had a tough stretch, so that was nice to see. Now the question was going to become for her, when was that first win coming? Red Bull 4-5 after Lennon decided to press spectate and help Ferrari's chances here. Netsky and Timbat had a little funny moment in qualifying. They finished P6 and P7, and Polo got to finish down in P9. This was his only points finish of the season. I mean, that was not a great look at all. And that was definitely a question of, well, is this going to be familiar? Well, in the sprint in Baku, our only sprint, we had quite the race for a victory. And our sprint as well, with that being said. AMS Wards made his debut in the Mercedes, giving them some hope. And Toki finally got a teammate back. Polo was missing a lot of races this season, but some were due to personal matters, some were not, and he definitely took a lot of blame for that. And I think if he did race a lot more, he would definitely be in the conversation a lot. We'll talk about Imola in a little bit, but for Baku, Wards definitely put up a good performance in qualifying. It was F1 Shorts taking sprint pole and finishing P3 in the sprint. Again, you would think that the sprint pole winner would finish P1 or P2 in the sprint like the previous times it showed. Well, that didn't happen. Night Owl held off Reese Dainty to the line. That was 1-2. And this is where the championship race needed to get better for Reese Dainty. Those previous races not having things go his way. The wrong strategy calls twice in a row. The mistake in the last lap in Silverstone. It just wasn't going his way. And it didn't go his way again in Baku. He got held up by Isha trying to salvage something for Haas and didn't get a point because of it. Haas was left without a point for a long while this entire season. But Reese Dainty back and forth and didn't finish on the podium like both Ferraris did. Lennon finally broke through, got that first podium of the season. Night Owl got P2. And it was really a race to try and pass drivers like F1 Shorts, Beatnik, who finished P6, and Torn Penguin. Torn Penguin won the race, his second win. Seems like this guy was definitely a master of street circuits. Every street circuit up until our final race of the season, he was in contention for the victory. So, definitely interesting one, but Torn Penguin held on. Just had the outright pace. 5-second gap for the victory. And you don't usually see dominant victories like that, but we saw another one happen in Spa. Mintoki, from pole position, won this race. Gotta wonder, when is this driver going to win multiple races during the season? When is she going to finally break through and have multiple winning season? She didn't have the multiple pole sitting season like she did the previous season. But this race in Spa, she obliterated the competition, no doubt about it. And Real Fusion, who finished in second, he didn't win a race this season, but he had a lot of races like this where he was definitely ahead of the competition, like Night Owl and Reese. And although there was a lot of conversation on drivers potentially being moved up, after F1 Shorts got moved up after Baku, Real Fusion didn't really show anything worthy of being moved up. And he didn't really show anything worthy of winning any races this season except for Zandvoort. However, Spa proved that Night Owl and Reese are beatable. So again, the conversation about people being moved up was kind of out of the question at that point of the season. It was more so for this next game, F125, everyone's going to be looking at now, though. And Night Owl finished P3 ahead of Reese in P5. That was definitely helpful. Reese got a penalty in the stewards room, putting him behind his teammate Torn Penguin. So that was definitely a big help. And also, there was a big race for P10 in the end. Haas, Sauber, they were trying to score their first points of the season. It didn't happen. Neski finished P10, and he was the one who took over F1 Shorts' McLaren afterwards. And with Mintoki's win in Spa, you have to wonder, well, is she going to back it up and win Imola? No. Little battle between her and her teammate Polo kind of got the two in the frustrated end, and it definitely was time to change things around there. It definitely showed. Beatnik, who had a good race for VCarb, finished P4. He'd been basically reserving this entire season after doing Tier 3 full-time, and he was one of 3 drivers that day who didn't pick up a penalty. Lennon and Night Owl, who finished P2 and P3 in Imola, were the other 2. And again, a day where Reese was faster and the fastest in Imola. That's the day Night Owl needed for the sake of this championship, just to finish in a good spot, and he did. He did. Red Bull kind of had Ferrari Academy tactics in their way from a driver in the Haas. But at the end of the day, though, Reese Dainty, throughout that, screen freezes, everything else, still managed a dominant win again. We're wondering, okay, Tier 2 seeing these DRS trains back and forth, these dominant wins now. Where's this coming from? Reese Dainty had 6 seconds of penalties from track limits and still managed the margin of victory to be over 5 seconds. So it was definitely a dominant win, that was for sure. And maybe we'll have to look over some of our dominant wins on F124 with that being said. It's definitely going to be something we look at for sure. Mintoki, who had that beef with Polo during the race for a little while, teammates trying to figure things out on who should be in front. Mintoki had 6 seconds. Polo also had 6 seconds at the end, but, they weren't really helping each other. Mintoki finished P6. Giant T finished P7. He had a very quiet season. He got poles, remember, at the start of this game cycle for Red Bull. And now he got put in the VCarb. He didn't get a chance in the Red Bull this season. What he did do is he did outperform expectations, though. I don't think J&T was expected to do as much as he did, especially missing a lot of races, too, at times. Ardell made his Tier 2 return. He collided with Fusion in that race. Ardell had a lot of penalties, but he was battling up there in that race for P4 with Beatnik. So you definitely got to wonder what could have been. Speaking of what could have been, Polo, who had that beef with Mintoki, DNF'd at the end. AR Biscuit lagged out, finished outside the points. He would have got that podium instead of Lennon, most likely. So you definitely have to wonder if that didn't happen, could Ferrari have traded the cars the way they did, like they did on the last lap? Lennon let Night Owl through. Speaking of Ferrari, they needed something serious to salvage in Brazil. Their constructors' hopes were practically over. And with Lennon already missing last moment, Bar 2 was called up. And in his previous races, he had a collision with Wavy in Baku, DNF'd in Spa, and he had been wanting a better chance. Maybe to show himself, maybe racing the Haas, but Invade told him, you need to finish races first. Well, this one, he lagged out in. He joined late already as it was, and didn't qualify well. And every time he was racing a driver, he was giving them way too much space. And that was the problem. Anytime he got in a battle, it's basically comparable with, you go back to the days of Luke Range, winning races in dominant style. It kind of compares to a driver like that, not racing someone often, and just simply giving them so much space because you're not in a battle a lot, and you kind of freak out. And I'm sure some people felt bad for him, but not when it came to the final lap. He ended up going dead right in the wall, went airborne, and maybe missed out on a point or two because of it. Whether he said that was his AI or not, that was definitely a question of something what an AI would do. The only time that we saw an AI do something like that in RPL in recent memory was Zakaria when he was not in the session in Austria in Tier 2. This car went dead right into the wall when he tried pressing rejoin, but then again, Ferrari got P9 that day with Bar 2, and their championship hopes into Saudi Arabia for the constructors was not good. This race in Brazil was not good for its attendance. 12 people racing. You had faded last moment in the Haas, Maddie in the Sauber, and Maddie ended up scoring points for Sauber as well. That was kudos to him. I gotta give him credit there. J&T finished 7th for V-Carb, another driver trying to get some points on a day where there was not a lot of people. Leon was called up last moment for Aston Martin and got P10, and that's why I hate when you see drivers retire. You know that there's not a lot of people racing, and it doesn't help the matter. Polo was frustrated with the setup, finished on a P11 with a DNF, but it was a big race out in front between Night Owl, Penguin, and Beatnik. It was Night Owl winning the race and the championship with it. Reece Dainty missed this race as well, so practically it was between Night Owl and Penguin. Penguin's season was definitely consistent in the sense of P4 finishes a lot. He didn't really get many podiums without the victory. Every time he's been on the podium, it seems he's always been on the top steps. So this one was a bit different. But this was to salvage his hopes. In the end, Beatnik got P3, a return to the podium. Lyra Fusion had that 10-second penalty and didn't win this race because of it. He sped in the pit lane. That was a shame for him. I mentioned Zandvoort, him having a chance for the victory, but this one he really did too. This was the best one. This was his best track as well. Didn't go his way. AR Biscuit finished in front of him in the end too, and he had a 3-second track limit penalty. So, although Biscuit got his best finish from McLaren, we're definitely not happy with how that went. And Lyra Fusion, by the way, he got his first pole that weekend as well. In Saudi Arabia, we saw a little bit better attendance in the end, and we still have yet to see the stewards report as of this moment, but it was Beatnik in his return, winning the race on penalties. Josh 433, who made a return as well for Ferrari to try and salvage a last-ditch effort for the sake of the constructors, won this race on track, had the 3-second, and didn't win it. That's how it went for him. And for the sake of Josh, it was a good return, to be honest, in terms of pace. But I do think the safety car helped any sort of challenge. He was battling Reese, battling Penguin, battling Night Owl before then, so kind of made it a race between him and Beatnik. But Beatnik, on loan to Mercedes, won again in Tier 2, won the finale race once again in Tier 2 as well, and he also won in the third different type of Mercedes. Not sure we've had many drivers do that in terms of times in RPL. The only driver I could think of doing that is probably Luke Range from, probably 2019 to 2021. But Blonde also returned. He was on loan. He got a podium in the Aston Martin. And who knows? Maybe he does race more often, but he used to be a Tier 2 champion as far as we could remember back in Season 6, the season after Reece Dainty won his. Reece Dainty, who got pole in this race, got Red Bull's 100th Tier 2 pole as well. Red Bull won the Constructors with Red Bull finishing back there. Night Owl finished P4. If he keeps that spot, he'll have the most drivers points in a single season by a Tier 2 driver. If Reece does get that 3-second removed, Night Owl will have that tied with the record, so we'll see what happens there. But because of Jack, Miles, and Cryptic trying to fill out numbers as well, they were disqualified. So Jackster, finishing P10 for Haas, got their only point of the season. Well done, Jackster. Last moment call, reserve call to stand in, and got it done. This race saw a safety car that changed things for Reese, Penguin, and Night Owl. Two of the three of them were on hards, so they kind of had to stay out. But the other one on mediums decided to stay out anyway, and that got them on the back foot. So that's why you saw, for the first time, a Red Bull or McLaren not on the podium in almost 3 full seasons. And also, the first time since Portugal this season that Night Owl was not on the podium. I mean, Night Owl, who won the championship, had a very consistent season. So whether he ties it or does get it fully to himself, he does have a good right to have the most amount of driver points in a single season by a driver in Tier 2 again. Jack Miles, who was filling in that race for numbers, obviously DQ'd with Cryptic, might get to see the own record shared with himself or broken this race. So I guess that's one way to do it. But Beatnik definitely proved, as he's joining Mintoki next season on F125, that this was definitely the right way to go out with winning in Saudi Arabia. Now, our awards for the end of the season and everything to talk about. The winner of the championship for the drivers was Night Owl. The constructors' champion was Red Bull. Assuming everything stays the way it is, Night Owl the champion, Torn Penguin, if Reese does not get that penalty removed, will be finishing ahead of Reese 18 the championship by 1 point. If Reese gets that penalty removed, it's Reese who finishes second, and obviously the other one in third. You understand where that's going, of course, but with the constructors, the top 3 in the end was Red Bull, ahead of Ferrari, and then McLaren. McLaren didn't really have the best of seasons, but they had good qualifiers, short and fusion. Constructor with the least amount of points, we know that one already. That's Haas. Most wins this season. I believe that was Night Owl. I'm going to double check this one. Yes, it was. Constructor with the most wins. That would be Red Bull tied with Ferrari, actually, right there. Mercedes only won 2 races, by the way. Mintoki and Beatnik. Most poles this season. Pretty sure that was definitely a Reese Dainty on this aspect. But I'd have to double check the stats. Most podiums, Night Owl. Now, for some of our awards handed out this entire season. Here's what the drivers voted on. Best driver this season, 100% went to Night Owl. I would agree. Underperformed this season, they gave it to Polo with 75%. I would also have to agree. The other options being Lennon and Gagi. Overperformed this past season, Beatnik 7 votes, 58% of the vote. Other choices, Penguin and Shorts, again, I'd have to agree. Even as a reserve, that was nice to see. Biggest surprise, 46% of the vote, Beatnik returning to winning. I actually went with both McLarens on pole and no win. I know it's supposed to be a positive way, but that was definitely a surprise. And most underrated this past season, 100% of the vote, Torn Penguin. Agreed with that. Other options being Mintoki and J&T. And lastly, most overrated this season. This is what the drivers got to vote on. Tied at the top, 42% of the vote. Shorts and Fusion both. I would probably have to give this tiebreaker to Lyra Fusion. I went a little way too high in my predictions and thought he'd be the champion, but that didn't happen. I thought he'd at least get 1 win this season anyway if he wasn't going to be the champion, but things quickly changed. Now, the only other awards we could give right now at this current moment in time, best race, most chaotic race, and we'll review all of our first-time winners. For this season, we didn't have any first-time winners. We didn't. We only had Beatnik get his first game cycle win, and that was practically it. No first-time winners this season in Tier 2. However, our most chaotic race, if you go back and look at how things ended up to be, probably would have to say Zandvoort, maybe Japan, maybe Portugal. But I would have to give it to probably Zandvoort with everything that was going on. Japan probably a close second, but Tier 2 this season was up and down, and that's because of its numbers. Now, our best race of the season, we had a close race in Silverstone for the victory. That was nice to see. Baku was spread out, I would say. Saudi was nice as well. I would say best race of the season. It's a toss-up between Saudi, Japan, and Portugal. And I would love to give it to Saudi based on how our final race went. Our final race was actually a really neat one, but I don't think it was the best one. In terms of action, chaos, and everything with it, I would have to go with Japan. You practically did not know who was going to win that race until the final dance, and that is actually how it went. Night Owl racing Reese in the final lap, that's how it ended up. A 10th at the end. In that 3rd place spot on the podium, remember, Beatnik bottled that podium. A safety car interfered with things. Reese had a bad start. He had to recover after that. I would say Japan was our best race. So there you go, folks. That is it. That is it from our Season 16 Tier 2 recap season review. I'm Ryan Searles, and we are saying goodbye. Make sure you check out when we release it, or if it's already released by the time we put it out, our Season 12 Tier 1 recap and our Season 4 Tier 3 recap. We'll also be going over the F124 game cycle in review as well. But until next time, folks, good night and goodbye.